I tend to think that the Americans have agreed with the Russians that ideally Zelenskyy will leave power. And that will sort of deprive Putin of another one of his cards. He's always claiming that Zelenskyy is illegitimate as a leader.
But first to Ukraine. The latest draft of a peace proposal agreed by Ukraine and the US has been sent to Russia as hopes for peace at Christmas have all but faded. Speaking to reporters in Kyiv, President Zelenskyy said the deal included promises for demilitarised zones in the east of Ukraine and immediate elections in the country as soon as a deal is signed. John Lough is head of foreign policy at the new Eurasian Strategy Centre and he joins us this afternoon. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, John, when I'm sure there are jobs you could be doing, but we very much appreciate you making time to speak with us. John, just summarise what's new and different in this deal. I know there's 20 points, but how does it differ from previous proposals?
It's a refined version of the 28-point plan that the Americans put to the Ukrainians some weeks ago, having sketched out something with the Russians. And I think what we can see emerging from this is a consensus, at least between the Americans and the Ukrainians, that Ukraine is going to have to give up some territory, but in return, it's going to receive robust security guarantees. Equally, once a ceasefire is in place, elections will be held. And more than that, the size of the Ukrainian armed forces is going to be set at a actually relatively high level, 800,000, which is a very large army in peacetime. But Ukraine is effectively going to provide its own security guarantee, admittedly with support from its, I think, fundamentally European allies. So we can see what the Americans want to try to agree now with the Russians. But as I've said all along, the devil is going to be in the detail here, because it's a big question. There's a big question here around how you introduce a ceasefire along such a wide front, over 1,000 kilometers, how you then verify this, what sort of peace monitoring mission you have to have in place. And then the really contentious issue is around this idea of a demilitarized zone in the Donbas region. Putin wants to get control of the whole of Donbas. And I think for him, this is non-negotiable. So just how the Americans are going to try and square the circle here is absolutely unclear. And then last but not least, there is the question of how the Western allies, and here particularly the Europeans, are going to provide these robust security guarantees, because that effectively implies you've got to have some forces at least close to Ukraine's borders, if not on Ukraine's territory. And having European forces on Ukraine's territory, the Russians have said several times, is a complete no-no.
So Zelenskyy has said that the most difficult point of this proposal, John, is the issue of territory. And by that, he is referring to this demilitarized zone. Is that right?
Yes. Effectively, the Russians, I think, have proposed freezing the front line in two regions where they had originally said they wanted to get hold of both of them. That's Kherson and Zaporizhia. But as far as the Donetsk region is concerned, and a little bit of Lugansk region, they simply want to get control of the whole of that. And this is extremely difficult for the Ukrainians, because they're in that region in Donetsk. There are about 250,000 people living. So what's supposed to happen to them? Are they supposed to come under Russian administration, or they have to be moved out of that territory for the most part? And fundamentally, it's a question here for the Ukrainians. They fought so hard and bitterly and effectively, I would say, to stay in this war. And now they're being told that the territory they control in Donbas has to be given up. And of course, this is extremely contentious in the country, much as people want this war to come to an end. So there is a view that among some Ukrainians, probably more militant types, look, we've been fighting this long. It's much better for us to keep on fighting and see how long we can go on for, possibly exhaust the Russians more in the process. And if we lose that territory, we lose it, but we haven't surrendered it.
So one of the other points that to me looks like it could be a major point of contention is this Ukraine being allowed to retain its bid to join NATO. I mean, all the previous US proposals have asked for binding agreements they would never join. And also there's a route to EU membership included in this proposal. That's going to be a point of contention, isn't it?
I think EU membership much less, because the Russians don't see the EU as being any sort of serious military power or developing that type of force. And particularly now they can see more divisions within the EU. So I think they're probably more relaxed about that. And even they might see benefit in saying Ukraine to join the EU, because it's going to be a divisive issue for EU members, letting in such a large country. We can see that already. As far as NATO membership is concerned, I believe the NATO issue is simply off the table now, because the US, if you look at the NATO's national security strategy, says, look, the days of endless NATO enlargement are over. And the US is not interested in the further enlargement of the alliance eastwards. And it clearly doesn't see that it has to underwrite Europe's security in the way that it did in the past. So I think the Russians here feel that they pretty much got what they want, because the Americans are just giving it. They're not interested in it anymore. So it's not a position, if you like, that's been traded at all. It's just, not on the table.
And Zelenskyy is promising an election immediately after any peace deal is made. Is that a stipulation of Russia, or is it something that will also appease Ukrainians? And also, John, I'm interested, is it a risky inclusion for Zelenskyy? What's the feeling in Ukraine about his leadership right now?
Well, this is a very, very difficult question. I think there's much admiration, if you like, for the way that Zelenskyy has managed to galvanize the international community, the Western allies, during this war. I think he's done in that respect an absolutely remarkable job. But the way the country has been governed during wartime with extreme centralization of power has created a lot of resentment and unhappiness. And I think it's fair to say that in some quarters, Zelenskyy is extremely unpopular. But at the same time, people realize they have to get behind their leader during a war, because to show divisions is exactly what the Russians want. And when he got hauled over the coals in the Oval Office in February, Ukrainians rallied round him.
Yeah. Which brings an interesting question. I mean, even if you were to have an election, who would stand against him, John, at a time like this?
Well, I think we have to see who's going to appear when a ceasefire, let's say, hopefully takes hold, and it's a sustainable ceasefire, because I think we're going to see some dramatic developments in Ukrainian politics, and new people appearing, probably war veterans among them, new political parties, new agendas. So the question is, where will Zelenskyy stand again or not? Because there's no obvious person at the moment to stand against him. But I think that's still a long way down the road. He realizes that he does require, the Ukrainian constitution stipulates that they don't have to hold elections during wartime when martial law is in place. But if he were to stay in office, he would obviously have to get a new mandate. So we'll have to see if he will do that. I tend to think that the Americans have agreed with the Russians that ideally Zelenskyy will leave power. And that will sort of deprive Putin of another one of his cards. He's always claiming that Zelenskyy is illegitimate as a leader because, of course, his mandate expired technically last year. But that raises, of course, the broader question about the legitimacy of Putin as president, given the way elections are run in Russia, the way he tinkered with the constitution. And, of course, none of that is ever mentioned.
John, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's fantastic to speak to you. Have a very Merry Christmas. That is John Lough, who is Head of Foreign Policy at the new Eurasian Strategies Centre.